Have you ever wondered why so many women, after years of marriage, begin to feel distant, irritated, or even resentful towards their husbands? The man she once admired, the man she once proudly introduced as her world, slowly becomes the man she tolerates. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a silent process. And if you don't understand it, you could wake up one day to a wife who looks at you with more disappointment than love. Today, I'm going to uncover the real reasons this shift happens, and more importantly, what every man must know to stop it before it's too late. In the beginning of a marriage, everything feels alive. Every word you speak to her feels meaningful. Every glance carries electricity. Every late night conversation feels like a secret bond only you two share. In those early days, men are attentive. They ask questions, they listen with curiosity, they remember small details, they put in effort to connect with her on an emotional level. And women thrive on that connection. For a woman, emotional intimacy is not a luxury. It's the foundation of how she feels about her husband. But what happens over time is that men begin to shift. Once the relationship feels secure, many men believe the work is done. They start investing their energy in their career, their responsibilities, or even just their routines, and slowly that emotional effort begins to disappear. What was once an intentional act of connection turns into short, surface level exchanges. And what was once a deep relationship begins to feel like two people coexisting under the same roof. This erosion doesn't happen in one day, it's a silent decline. At first, a woman might brush it off, telling herself that he's busy, he's stressed, or maybe this is just how marriage is supposed to be. But deep down, she starts to feel something shift. The man who once wanted to know everything about her day, her thoughts, her dreams, now barely notices the little things. When she shares something meaningful, his response feels distracted. His attention is somewhere else, and she begins to feel invisible. Women might not say it directly, but emotional neglect weighs heavier on them than almost anything else. You see, when a woman doesn't feel heard, when she doesn't feel seen, when she doesn't feel emotionally connected, she doesn't just lose affection, she begins to lose respect. And respect is the foundation of love for a woman. If she cannot look at you as her safe space, if she cannot look at you as someone who truly understands her, then love starts to wither. This is why so many women, after years of marriage, feel more comfortable talking to their friends, their siblings, or even strangers on the internet rather than opening up to their own husbands. It's not because they don't want to connect with their partner, it's because they've tried and somewhere along the way they gave up. Men often underestimate how damaging silence and disconnection can be in a relationship. They think, I'm providing, I'm loyal, I'm here, isn't that enough? But for a woman, presence without emotional connection feels like absence. It feels like living with someone who's physically there but emotionally miles away. And once she feels this gap, she starts to emotionally withdraw too. The warm, engaging, affectionate wife becomes colder, less patient, less interested. Not because she's changed as a person, but because she feels like she has no emotional return on the investment she's making. Every time she shares something and you dismiss it, every time she seeks your attention and you're too distracted, every time she craves depth and you only give her surface level responses, a small piece of her love dies. Over years, these small deaths accumulate into resentment, and that resentment turns into dislike, not because she stopped loving you out of nowhere, but because the man she once felt deeply connected to is no longer there. This is why couples who don't prioritize emotional connection end up as strangers. They may still share a home, they may still fulfill responsibilities, but they're no longer partners. They're more like business associates handling logistics, paying bills, raising kids, managing chores, but the romance, the intimacy, the bond that once held them together has been eroded. Women begin to dislike their husbands not because of one big fight or one major failure, but because of the slow, silent starvation of emotional intimacy. And the saddest part is, most men don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. One of the most dangerous phases in any marriage begins when a man enters the comfort zone. In the early stages of a relationship, he invests time, energy, and effort into presenting the best version of himself. He dresses well, he pays attention to his words, he carefully chooses how to surprise her, how to make her feel special, and how to win her admiration. But once the marriage feels secure, many men unconsciously shift gears. They think, I've already won her heart. I've already got her commitment. Now I don't need to try as hard. And that small shift is where the slow death of attraction begins. A woman may never say it openly, but she notices when a man starts treating the relationship like a duty instead of a priority. She notices when the effort that once excited her disappears and is replaced by monotony. The comfort zone looks harmless at first. It's simply a man feeling at home with his wife, believing he doesn't have to impress her anymore. But over time, it becomes a trap that suffocates the relationship. When he stops grooming himself, when he stops planning little moments together, when he stops showing curiosity about her life, he's unconsciously telling her, "You're not worth the effort anymore." And for a woman, that message cuts deep because women don't just fall in love with who a man was at the beginning. They stay in love when he keeps showing her that she still matters, that she still inspires him to put in effort, that she is still the woman he wants to win over every single day. When a man enters the comfort zone, the dynamic shifts. Instead of being admired, he starts being tolerated. Instead of being a source of excitement, he becomes predictable. Instead of being her partner in growth, he becomes the man who blends into the background of her life. And women, by nature, do not admire what feels stagnant. They admire what feels alive, evolving, and purposeful. The husband she once proudly introduced to her friends and family as the man I love slowly turns into the man I live with. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of years of watching him stop trying, years of watching him abandon the habits that once made her feel desired. The danger of the comfort zone is that it breeds complacency, not just in appearance, but in behavior. A man who once used to plan dates now thinks sitting in front of the TV counts as quality time. A man who once paid attention to the little things she loved now forgets birthdays, anniversaries, and special details. A man who once made her laugh now hardly makes conversation. And when a woman feels like she's no longer being courted, she feels like she's no longer cherished. Love cannot survive in an environment where effort dies, and respect cannot survive where complacency takes over. Over time, the comfort zone also begins to feed irritation. The same little habits she once found cute or forgivable become sources of frustration when paired with the absence of effort. His laziness, his carelessness, his lack of initiative, all of it begins to stand out more when she realizes he's stopped growing and stopped trying. What many men don't realize is that women equate effort with love. When you stop putting in effort, she doesn't think you're just being comfortable. She interprets it as you no longer caring. That interpretation builds resentment, and resentment builds distance. The saddest part about the comfort zone is that it's often invisible to the man. He thinks everything is fine because life is stable, bills are being paid, and routines are in place. But she feels it. She feels the lack of energy, the lack of passion, the lack of initiative. She feels like she's carrying the emotional weight of keeping the relationship alive while he's coasting. And eventually, the comfort zone makes her lose the very thing that once made her proud to be his wife, her admiration for him. One of the most powerful forces that keeps a woman deeply connected to her husband is admiration. A woman doesn't just want love, she wants to look at her husband with pride, to see him as someone she can respect, someone she can look up to, someone she believes is leading the family forward. In the early years, many men carry that drive. They are ambitious, motivated, eager to achieve something meaningful. They dream big, they work hard, and their wives admire the fire they see in them. But what happens with time is that many men lose that hunger. They get comfortable with where they are, they stop striving for more, and they become stagnant. To them, stability feels like success, but to a woman, stagnation feels like decline. A woman can forgive failures, she can stand by her man during hard times, and she can even endure financial struggles if she sees him fighting, if she sees him determined to rise again. But what she cannot respect is a man who gives up on growth. Because the moment a man loses his ambition, he also loses her admiration. And once admiration is gone, love begins to feel like a burden. Women are not designed to thrive under a man they cannot respect. Respect and attraction are tied together for them. She cannot continue to desire a man who has settled for mediocrity, who has no vision, no goals, no hunger for life. The lack of growth doesn't always have to mean financial success. It's not just about money or career. It's about growth as a person. When a man stops working on his health, stops improving his mindset, stops learning new skills, stops evolving spiritually or emotionally, he becomes the same man year after year. And while he may see that as being consistent, she sees it as being stuck. A woman doesn't want the same version of her husband 10 years later. She wants to see evolution. She wants to know that the man leading her family is becoming wiser, stronger, sharper, more capable of navigating life's challenges. When she doesn't see growth, she begins to feel like she's outgrowing him, and nothing creates distance faster than a woman feeling like she's advancing while her husband is standing still. This is why so many women, as the years pass, start to lose excitement in their marriage. The man she once admired for his drive now spends evenings in front of the TV with no goals other than getting through the day. The man she once looked up to for his ambition now spends his energy making excuses for why he hasn't pursued anything meaningful. The man she once saw as her leader now feels like another dependent, someone she has to push, motivate, or even nag just to get moving. And the truth is, a woman doesn't want to be her husband's coach or mother. She wants to be his partner. She doesn't want to carry him. She wants to be carried with him as he rises. When a man lacks ambition, it also makes her feel unsafe about the future. A woman's sense of security in a relationship isn't just about money, it's about knowing that her husband is a man who can adapt, who can grow, who can rise to challenges. If she feels like he is stuck, if she feels like he has no vision, then her trust in him begins to crumble. And when trust crumbles, resentment follows. She begins to see him not as the man she admired, but as the man she has to settle for. That subtle shift creates an emotional wall between them, and over time, that wall becomes impossible to ignore. What men often fail to see is that women don't dislike them because of where they are in life. They dislike them because they don't see any effort to move forward. A man making small, consistent progress is far more attractive to his wife than a man who has given up trying altogether. It's not about reaching the top, it's about showing the will to climb. Because the moment she feels he has stopped climbing, she stops believing in him. And when she stops believing in him, she stops feeling connected to him in the way she once did. One of the most silent killers of love in a marriage is the breakdown of communication. At the start of a relationship, conversations flow naturally. There is excitement in every exchange, late night calls, long discussions about dreams, laughter over small things, and constant curiosity about each other. In those moments, communication feels effortless, and both partners feel deeply connected. But as time passes, life gets busier, responsibilities pile up, routines take over, and slowly the quality of communication begins to erode. What used to be heartfelt conversations turn into short, transactional dialogues. Did you pay the bill? What's for dinner? Who's picking up the kids? The intimacy of communication is replaced by the logistics of daily life, and with it, the emotional closeness begins to fade. For women, this silence is far more painful than many men realize. A woman thrives on emotional expression, on being able to share her thoughts and feelings openly, and on knowing her partner is truly listening. When she feels that her words fall on deaf ears, or worse, when her husband avoids conversations altogether, she begins to feel emotionally abandoned. Men often think that staying quiet during conflict or withdrawing from conversations is a way to keep peace. But to a woman, silence feels like rejection. She doesn't interpret it as calmness. She interprets it as indifference. And when she feels her husband is indifferent, her trust in his love begins to weaken. Miscommunication also plays a destructive role. When men and women stop talking openly, misunderstandings grow. A small issue that could have been resolved through a 5-minute honest conversation turns into days of coldness, distance, or even bitterness. A wife may express her frustration, but if her husband dismisses it or interprets it as nagging, the message she receives is that her emotions don't matter. Over time, she stops speaking up altogether. And when a woman stops sharing her thoughts, it's not a sign of peace. It's a sign that she has given up. She begins to emotionally detach, and that detachment is the root of the dislike that creeps in later. The silence also strips away companionship. A husband and wife who don't communicate deeply are no longer best friends. They become co managers of a household. They live under the same roof, but their hearts are miles apart. She no longer feels excited to share her wins or her struggles with him because she already knows he won't truly engage. And the lack of meaningful dialogue leaves her feeling alone, even when he's sitting right beside her. That loneliness inside a marriage is one of the heaviest burdens a woman can carry because it convinces her that she is emotionally on her own. Men underestimate how much women crave not just physical presence, but emotional presence. A man can be home every day, yet if he doesn't connect, if he doesn't communicate, if he doesn't ask questions and truly listen, she feels as though he's absent. And that absence is far more damaging than physical distance. Many women say they feel more alone inside their marriage than they did when they were single. And that's because silence creates a void where intimacy used to live. And then comes the resentment. Each ignored conversation, each avoided conflict, each evening spent in silence instead of connection adds up. What starts as mild disappointment slowly transforms into bitterness. She begins to see him not as a partner she can rely on emotionally, but as a wall she can't get through. And once she stops trying to get through that wall, she also stops seeing him as someone she wants to draw closer to. The husband, who once was her confidant, becomes the man she can't open up to, and that shift is the beginning of her dislike. In the early stages of marriage, gratitude comes naturally. A husband notices the little things, a warm meal, a supportive word, the way she takes care of him, the effort she puts into making the house a home. He praises her, he shows appreciation, and she feels valued. But as time passes, many men unconsciously fall into the trap of taking their wives for granted. What was once appreciated as effort becomes expected as routine. He no longer thanks her for the meals, no longer acknowledges the sacrifices, no longer notices the details she carefully puts together. Slowly, she starts to feel invisible, like her role in his life is no longer something special, but just an obligation she is fulfilling without recognition. For a woman, being taken for granted is one of the most painful experiences in marriage because it robs her of her sense of worth within the relationship. She doesn't want extravagant gifts or constant flattery. What she craves is acknowledgement. She wants to know that her presence matters, that her efforts are seen, that her contributions are not overlooked. When a husband stops appreciating his wife, he is sending an unspoken message. What you do is not important. That message eats away at her heart, slowly transforming her love into bitterness. This lack of gratitude often shows up in the smallest of ways. She spends her day balancing multiple responsibilities: work, home, children, family matters. Yet when he comes home, instead of noticing her effort, he only points out what's missing. If the food is late, he complains. If the house isn't spotless, he criticizes. If she seems tired, he accuses her of not caring enough. Day after day, these small dismissals build into a heavy weight on her heart. A woman doesn't stop loving her husband overnight. She stops loving him when she feels like no matter how much she gives, it will never be enough. What men often fail to realize is that women don't expect perfection in a marriage. They expect appreciation. Gratitude has the power to soften her heart, to reignite her motivation, to remind her why she gives so much of herself. But ingratitude hardens her heart. It makes her feel used, like she's pouring into someone who takes but never pours back. And once a woman feels like she's only being used for convenience, her love begins to turn into resentment. The man she once served with joy becomes the man she serves out of duty, and duty without gratitude becomes suffocating. Being taken for granted also strips away romance. A woman who doesn't feel appreciated stops putting in effort to create intimacy. She withdraws, she becomes colder, not because she doesn't care, but because she feels like caring doesn't make a difference. When her energy, her presence, and her love go unnoticed, she starts saving that energy for herself. And this withdrawal frustrates the husband, who often doesn't understand that the root cause was his lack of appreciation in the first place. He sees her pulling away, but doesn't connect it to the way he's neglected to value her over the years. This dynamic can be devastating to a relationship. Over time, she no longer feels proud to stand by his side. She no longer feels like his partner. She feels like his servant. And when a woman feels reduced to nothing more than someone who cooks, cleans, and fulfills responsibilities without acknowledgement, she begins to dislike not just the role she's trapped in, but the man who put her there. The sparkle in her eyes fades, the warmth in her tone disappears, and her love turns into quiet resentment. She may still fulfill her duties, but her heart is no longer in it because it no longer feels appreciated. As marriage progresses, responsibilities grow heavier, bills increase, children enter the picture, family expectations rise, and the pressures of life weigh down on both partners. In those moments, the strength of the relationship doesn't depend on how easy life is, but on how well both partners carry the weight together. Sadly, many marriages suffer because the husband unconsciously leaves most of that emotional and practical burden on his wife. She becomes the one managing the home, handling the children, remembering the details, soothing conflicts, and keeping everything in order, while he assumes his role is limited to providing financially or simply being there. Over time, this imbalance creates not just stress, but deep resentment. For a woman, partnership is not about splitting tasks equally. It's about knowing that her husband stands beside her as a teammate. When she feels like she is carrying the weight of two people while he is only carrying himself, she begins to lose trust in his leadership. It's not just about chores, it's about emotional support. If she feels unheard when she's overwhelmed, if she feels alone in moments of stress, if she feels that her husband avoids responsibility and leaves everything on her shoulders, she stops seeing him as a partner and starts seeing him as another dependent. And once she feels like she has to mother her husband instead of leaning on him as her equal, the dynamic of love begins to collapse. This emotional burden shows up in countless little ways. She is the one who remembers the doctor's appointments, the school meetings, the birthdays, the family obligations. She is the one who notices when bills are due, when the children need attention, when the house needs fixing. And instead of seeing her efforts, many men dismiss them as normal or even fail to recognize them altogether. But for her, it feels like she is running a full-time operation while her husband simply participates when it suits him. That imbalance drains her energy and leaves her feeling unsupported, unappreciated, and alone. When a woman carries this kind of burden for years, it changes the way she sees her husband. At first, she may complain, she may ask for help, she may express her frustration. But if nothing changes, she eventually stops asking. She learns to do everything on her own. But in that process, she also stops seeing him as reliable. And when she no longer sees her husband as dependable, her admiration for him begins to vanish. Admiration cannot survive where there is no partnership. A woman cannot keep loving a man she feels she is carrying. The emotional toll of this imbalance is even deeper. When she feels unsupported, she begins to resent not just the responsibilities, but the man who left her to face them alone. Every time she comes home exhausted and sees him relaxed, every time she feels overwhelmed and he offers silence instead of support, every time she needs him and he withdraws, another layer of dislike builds in her heart. She doesn't just feel tired, she feels betrayed. Because in her mind, marriage was supposed to be a team effort, not a solo struggle disguised as partnership. This resentment eventually spills into other areas of the relationship. She becomes less affectionate, less patient, less forgiving. She doesn't look at him with the same softness because in her eyes, he has failed her in the most fundamental way, not by making mistakes, but by refusing to stand beside her in carrying life's weight. The man she once relied on becomes the man she feels abandoned by, and that shift transforms love into bitterness. A woman can forgive flaws, she can forgive imperfections, but she cannot forgive being left alone in a partnership that was supposed to be built on unity.